Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. I believe it is Juniper Research's second year doing the Analyst keynote, so it's great to be back again. Like I said, my name is Alicia Sudlow-Poole. I'm a Senior Research Analyst at Juniper Research. And today we'll be focusing on all things SMS, the channel that is producing the most revenue for the business messaging market at the moment. So in this presentation, we want to touch on a couple of key things. So the first thing we'll want to look at, give an overview of the SMS market. What will the SMS business messaging market expect to see over the next 5 years? And how will this SMS business messaging traffic grow over those years? But also, as we know, SMS has got a lot of competition these days. So what are the main threats to SMS business messaging? And how can those threats be mitigated? And then lastly, we'll look at the key opportunities of SMS, business messaging, and what is the future within the business messaging market. So the rapid digitalization of the telecommunications, the communications industry has seen that there's been a lot of pressure on enterprises to start onboarding a large number of messaging channels. We see there's been a growth in OTT messaging apps, RCS, SMS, chatbots, and then other things like voice as well. Enterprises are starting to onboard these channels to reduce the loss of subscribers. Subscribers and customers are getting a lot more picky and a lot more picky about how they interact with brands. So it is essential that these channels are onboarded. But saying this, SMS has remained an established and reliable revenue channel for operators and is now being looked to be deployed more strategically, whether that be through kind of increased security measures to reduce the revenue leakage. And Juniper Research forecasts that SMS will be particularly strong in geographies where smartphone penetration is low, so where feature phones are used more, and this is obviously in Africa, regions such as Africa and the Middle East, and in Central and East Europe. But obviously SMS is available on all mobile devices, so any region that has a large number of mobile subscribers will obviously be a key region there too. So Juniper Research forecasts, as you can see on the figure, that the total number of SMS business messages sent per annum will rise from 1.7 trillion in 2023 to 2.1 trillion by 2027. So it is still growing despite its established nature. But I also want to obviously caveat here that this figure is looking at business messages specifically. But P2P traffic for SMS is decreasing. It's migrating to more richer communication channels such as OTT messaging apps. And as we know, enterprises want to communicate with customers on their preferred channels. And if they're communicating with their peers on more rich messaging channels, it will be the case that there will be traffic migrating naturally to those richer messaging channels. But we can still see that our SMS traffic will be growing over the next 5 years. And I have touched on a number of the competing channels or the alternatives to business messaging, but SMS will remain the most used messaging channel despite the growth of these rich messaging apps. And that's because SMS has evolved to become a core element of the omnichannel value chain. The channels are able to deliver mission-critical messages, such as one-time passwords, your two-factor authentication, because it has that guaranteed termination. And the figure on the right, it shows that the total number of SMS-capable subscriptions, so not subscribers, subscriptions, will surpass 9.2 billion in 2023. And we also forecast that SMS will reach its market saturation by 2026. So looking at the other rich messaging channels and how they compare to the growth of SMS, we can go through the figures a bit later on, but the main alternatives to business messaging at the moment are RCS and OTT messaging channels. But there is a reason why these channels won't reach the growth that SMS has. So for example, obviously, OTT messaging apps face a large degree of regional fragmentation. So you've got specific apps such as, I know WhatsApp's the biggest OTT app currently, and that is big in regions such as Europe. However, when you're looking at regions such as Far East and China, they have a large degree of fragmentation on a country level. So they've got like WeChat, KakaoTalk, and Line. So if an enterprise wants to communicate with customers they have to be very strategic about what apps they onboard, how many apps they onboard, as to where their target audience is. And obviously RCS is another operator-led rich messaging channel. But that channel's faced, as we're all aware, obviously a lot of challenges in terms of hardware and interoperability. But we are seeing the support for RCS increase, whether it be slower than what was previously anticipated. But Juniper Research anticipates that RCS is often referred to as SMS 2.0. It can be referred to as, traffic will migrate to RCS once it becomes more mainstream. However, we see that these channels will have different types of use cases. So RCS will become that more two-way conversational channel, whereas SMS will be used for that one-way kind of guaranteed termination messages, those one-time passwords, etc. And if you look on the graph, it shows that the SMS will account for 85% of the global business messaging traffic in 2023. Yeah, you can see. And that will only decrease to 71% by 2027. So it still has a massive impact in the business messaging market. But obviously, it's not all, I can say the growth of SMS is great and it accounts for X percent of the market, but it does have its own challenges. So I'm just going to talk through the threats to SMS, whether it be through fraud or through other means. So the volatile nature of SMS wholesale SMS pricing means that channels such as OTT become a much better, much more viable, cost-effective alternative to brands and enterprises. And obviously, the increase in SMS traffic means that there's likely going to be an increase in the amount of fraud because of the increased surface area that they can attack. And this has obviously led to, this list on the right is not exhaustive, but it highlights, how vast and how expansive fraud is for SMS. But then obviously the increase in the price of wholesale SMS means that grey route traffic increases because P2P is obviously charged at a lower rate. And I believe, spoken earlier on about new types of fraud, such as artificially inflated traffic, where, message aggregators, or other, bad players inflate this traffic to increase their profit margins. And despite the SS7 network being heavily standardized, the attacks over this network layer aim to attack or exploit the vulnerabilities in the protocol to intercept SMS traffic. However, I spoke earlier on in the presentation how now that SMS has got a lot more competition relative to in previous years as the growth of rich messaging channels increases, it is starting to be deployed and managed more strategically. And we've seen a big increase in markets such as security as a service, where operators are looking to reduce the revenue loss that they have for SMS, and begin to use third-party service providers to manage their security protocols. And that's a short list of those protocols. You've got your firewalls, your penetration testing, etc. And they look to these third-party service providers to manage their networks. And as these providers have access to multiple network cores, they're able to provide a more holistic view of the overall market to be able to almost predict, that's a strong word, but almost predict the threat of future SMS. But obviously I've spoken about fraud being a key aspect to SMS traffic. There are a number of other things that aren't fraud related that will challenge SMS over the coming years. And one of them is obviously flash calling. So since approximately 2021, flash calling has proliferated massively in the market, and it looks to monetize, as more people look to monetize flash calling to reduce the need for SMS for authentication use cases. And this is due to, like I mentioned earlier, the fluctuations in SMS wholesale pricing. It increases the risk for brands because they're paying all this money for one message, whereas flash calling is a more more stable price point. And we believe that the growth of flash calling is unavoidable. We do believe that enterprises will look to seek these cost-effective alternatives. In order for operators to ensure they continue to have this revenue that is potentially lost from the use of SMS for the one-time passwords or the authentication messages, it needs to be priced at a similar price point to SMS. But also you have aspects such as voice firewalls that are going to need to be a key area of focus for operators in 2023 to manage the potential unmonetized traffic and reduce the potential loss of revenue generated by SMS. And a second one, which is quite a recent one, I imagine you've all heard this one. So in MWC this year, the GSMA announced its Open Gateway, API Gateway, which will enable the kind of swifter development and standardization of many telecommunication services, with two key use cases being identity and authentication. And again, this increase in those standardization, these use cases reduces the need for SMS as a potential channel for one-time passwords and multi-factor authentication. And we all know, obviously, the telecommunications industry can be quite slow in terms of adopting innovative technologies. And this Open Gateway is looking to remedy that. It will allow third-party authenticators to provide advanced and updated security measures, and again, reducing the need for SMS as an authentication channel. And another threat to SMS. So obviously, WhatsApp is one of the biggest OTT messaging apps currently in the market, in the business messaging market. And it's historically been priced on, well, it's currently and in the past been priced by two use cases, so your business and your user-initiated messages. However, recently WhatsApp announced that it's going to change from June this year. It's going to change how it prices these use cases to include 4 different types. So you've got your utility conversations, authentication, marketing conversations, which are all business-initiated. And then you've got your service conversations, which is then user-initiated. And the previous argument to why SMS would be used for a more authentication relative to WhatsApp is because the pricing for WhatsApp conversation was higher, because it was obviously a two-way dialogue. It wasn't just charging per message. However, this change in how WhatsApp is choosing to charge their messages for different use cases will further increase the competition between OTT and SMS for business messaging and for authentication. But however, obviously I mentioned earlier that OTT is at a disadvantage because it does have regional fragmentation. And obviously WhatsApp is in most countries, many regions, but it's not in all, and it can't guarantee message termination. And lastly, I won't carry on the doom and gloom on SMS, but one future threat, one in the long-term threat, is passwordless biometrics. So this is where brands and enterprises can leverage biometric detection capabilities on devices for authentication and verification of the users. This is a long-term threat to SMS messaging, to all types of messaging channels for authentication, because it negates the need of messaging channels. It doesn't need them to verify a user. And it is more secure than messaging channels because there's not any content to kind of corrupt or mimic. However, we do see this, like I say, a long-term threat, and we don't see it becoming very impactful for at least 10 years now. And with that, it will likely impact regions such as North America and Europe first, because in these regions, users, there's a higher kind of recycling of devices, so consumers like to get new devices every year or every 2 years. So that increased availability of devices means that there's a high replacement rate. So it's likely that as OEMs and handset support increases for this biometric technology, those that replace their technology quicker will have access to it earlier. So obviously I've spoken for a long time about all these threats, but whether it be fraud or otherwise, that SMS will experience. But then I mentioned at the start of the presentation that SMS is going to increase over the 5 years. But SMS is a core part of omnichannel communications. And whilst I've introduced a number of rival or alternative competing messaging channels, these new formats will not necessarily cannibalize the traffic for SMS use cases. They have their own use cases that they're successful in. But instead, it will create new use cases that aren't viable on SMS. It's that more conversational, richer communication that isn't viable on current SMS standards. And despite the pressures of all the things I've spoken about today on the SMS market, the title of this presentation, SMS Simplicity Means Success. And there is 3 very simple key elements to why SMS will maintain its dominance in the business messaging market. And that is these three key elements here. You've got your familiarity, reliability, and ubiquity. These 3 key elements are not, all the other channels that I've spoken about, all the other technologies that I've mentioned don't have these 3 key elements. So when we look at familiarity, enterprises and mobile subscribers are all familiar with SMS. It's likely the first channel that they used when they got their mobile phone. They'd likely still use it now, for both P2P and A2P, obviously. And things like flash calling traffic doesn't have this familiarity. There's not enough brand awareness. There's not enough education around the enterprise use of flash calling in the business communications market. And obviously, ubiquity is the key, I think, the key element to SMS. It's having these mission-critical use cases and ensuring kind of that message termination is why it's so heavily relied on. And all mobile subscribers are capable of receiving SMS messages. And obviously, I don't think you can see here, only SMS has a 100% penetration rate within mobile subscribers. And like I say, that's not available for any of the other channels that I've mentioned are rivaling SMS. And then lastly, we have reliability. And like I've said, SMS guarantees messaging termination. And that's not the case for RCS, that's not the case for OTT. Not all subscribers are RCS capable, not all subscribers will have that exact OTT messaging app that an enterprise is looking to communicate with them. And we think that these 3 key elements are the exact reason why SMS will remain one of the biggest channels, the biggest channel within the business messaging market over the next 5 years. So that kind of brings me to the end of this presentation. Before any questions, I would like to let you know that if you you were interested in the information I've spoken about, there is a bespoke white paper created by Juniper Research that will be on the MEF blog website, I believe either today or tomorrow, and you have access to that. And if you do want to, if you're interested in any more of Juniper Research's research, MEF members have access to a discount code for all of our messaging reports. So that will be where the white paper is located. So yes, are there any questions or Q&A?
Let's thank Alicia for the presentation. Take a seat, have a rest. Thank you, Susan. So we've got a countdown clock here, which I think should be like the so there's a little bit of time. I think we covered more or less everything there that sets us up for the rest of the day, certainly, and tomorrow as well. You've looked at the A2P SMS market, what's happening with OTTs and richer messaging, with fraud has been talked about. I know there's going to be sessions on fraud later, RCS. So within an omni-channel environment, and everyone's more or less got a smartphone, the figures you showed for A2P SMS, where it's growing 26% over the next few years, it's still going to be the biggest single channel. And then we're looking at the amount of fraud. I think you said I've got my glasses. The vast and expansive fraud that's happening. A lot of it very specific to SMS.
Yeah.
Within SMS, one of the major use cases being security and authentication, and other platforms now looking at that as well with WhatsApp authentication conversations. So where is the growth in SMS coming from that we're going to see over the next few years, where it's growing 26%?
Yeah.
Is that organic? Is it?
Well, obviously, it's a bit of both. It's organic and also kind of already used. So, like I did mention in the presentation, that we don't see SMS being the market being saturated until 2026. So there is still growth for mobile subscribers, and whether it be a feature phone or a smartphone, there is still a growth in the user base up until that point. But then obviously, like you mentioned, I spoke about security, and there are bigger markets like security as a service, as I mentioned in the presentation, is growing, and things like SMS firewalls is becoming more impactful. So in that way, that will reduce grey route traffic. So then that more traffic will be then attributed to A2P messaging.
Okay. Fair enough. So moving on, when we looked at the reach that's out there, 9.2 billion subscriptions, should we say, compared with, I think, roughly it was about 4 billion for OTTs and 3 billion or so for RCS. So the 9.2 billion subscriptions, obviously they're not humans. There's a lot of data only in there, M2M, IoT. So when we're looking at humans, excuse me, there's probably less than 6 billion. So the gap between the richer channels is actually not that big. It's a lot smaller. And moving into an omni-channel environment and CPaaS services where people, there might be new use cases where we're seeing a lot more conversational commerce and conversational marketing. If people can be accessed in that way and enterprises want to reach us how we want to be reached as well. Again, I mean, that growth that we're seeing in SMS, where it's going up 25% in the next few years, I mean, it seems, I know everything else is starting from a very low base, but it does seem like it's still just a one-horse race.
I mean, it is, and obviously, it depends as well on kind of what the markets you're looking at. So things like retail and advertisement will probably be, will be more inclined to use the richer messaging channels because they need that kind of two-way kind of communication. Whereas you have specific markets that are likely to remain on SMS, like maybe your banking or a kind of healthcare. Obviously, at the moment, that might change in over 5 years' time, but they'll still need the one-time passwords and just help. I know, obviously, dependent on region. Healthcare will just need, it's kind of like more reminders, more notification-based messaging. They don't need the richer messaging. They don't need the two-way conversations with customers at the moment.
Right. So, I mean, in an omnichannel environment, enterprises will use whatever means necessary, and the easiest one is SMS because they've got that reach. Exactly.
There's no risk to use SMS. Obviously, there's potentially risk in terms of their cost, return on investment, but in terms of guaranteeing that message termination, and then there's no risk there. There's no point paying for essentially a message to be sent on a channel that might not even be delivered to then fall back onto SMS. Okay. I mean, cost is an interesting thing. I mean, MEF, we don't talk a lot about pricing, but with you mentioned it, so I can ask you about it. With the volatile pricing that's going on in wholesale SMS, how much of a risk is, pricing to the future of SMS? Because obviously if it becomes too ridiculous, where we see international rates, doubling, tripling what they are domestically, and we have these other revenue identifiers with WhatsApp now going from 2 to 3 business and 1 user oriented. Is SMS in danger of pricing itself out of the market? I think it is. There's a big risk. There's only so high they can go before there's a point where enterprises won't use it, because there's less risk then to rely on something that might not deliver than pay silly prices for a message. It costs us a massive risk, and there needs to be more of a kind of interoperability between operators and between enterprise and by region or on a global scale. But price is a concern. especially as more operator-led things such as RCS and flash calling come out as well. They don't want to follow the same risk, but at the same time, they want to make sure they're not losing too much revenue if and when the traffic migrates to those channels. So it's a big topic of conversation, but it is a big risk as well.
Okay, I see the countdown clock's going, so if there's any questions in the room. Yep, there's...
Hi. Hi, good morning. Gene Pradas from BTS. Thank you, Alicia. That was very interesting in your presentation. I basically have two questions. The first one is talking about the risk. How would you rate the different risks? Like you mentioned a whole bunch of them today versus the same risk a year from now. That's question number one. Question number two is we're talking about the size of the market. Mm-hmm. The pie is getting bigger, so everybody's growing, or the pie is somewhat stagnant and this artificial traffic is taking over the growth. How would you view that? Thank you.
When you say risk, do you mean in terms of like the fraud or the other?
The fraud, yeah. I mean, the first question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So fraud is, if we're looking at grey route traffic is declining, which means that the firewalls are doing their job, or the security protocols are doing their job. But there is a big market. Fraud is like I said, it's a vast market, and it's very difficult to kind of say necessarily where it will be in a year's time, because it's always evolving. There's always new types of fraud being kind of becoming more mainstream. But I do think kind of as this kind of as a service market increases and operators are relying on third-party kind of security providers more, I think that the protocols that they use will become more efficient, because they've got access to more data, more types of fraud, to be able to improve their kind of AI-based algorithms. So I think that will become more efficient. I don't think it will still obviously be a high problem for SMS in a year's time. I don't know how much, it might not be the biggest impact in 12 months, but I do see the traffic for grey route specifically will decrease. So it will become more efficient.
Sorry. Not just the fraud, but let's say biometrics that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Today has an X percentage of the authentication.
Yeah.
But in a year, 2 years' time, I'm sure it's going to increase.
Yeah, I think in terms of biometrics, it might be a bit too early to kind of give a specific number or on how much traffic it might use. Like I said, I think we think it's still 10 years or so away from becoming mainstream. It all depends on the support from like OEMs and how quick those devices can become available to the consumer. But then also you have to see how ready all consumers be to use biometrics. I know some people have problems with that, but maybe the older generations. But yeah, I think biometrics is a bit too early to give specific figures on. I think the challenges come more with kind of the flash calling side, and yeah, obviously the change in pricing for WhatsApp, etc. Yeah.
That's great. Yep, thank you very much, Alicia. I think we've got no more time. Our clock has run out.
Now, yeah. Just like a little snap of you two. So if you could just stand up. Yeah, thanks to each other. Sam is there.